Good morning, brand DIYers, and let me start off with an apology. I'm a few minutes late, but I got held up in a meeting just now. So I've got a very, very cool kind of head-spinning topic for you today. It's something that is a bit complex, but I can tell you that this is something that doesn't just apply to big brands. It is very relevant for brands that are coming right out of the gate, because here's the thing. Most of us, when we come out of the gate, we have one product. If we are cursed by success, we say, okay, that worked really well. Let's create another product. So we create another product, and so on and so on. And most of us don't give a second thought to, all right, how are these products going to be connected together? Well, here's a product. We were successful with that. We called it the ABC. And then we invented a new product and we call it the DEF. And why can't they just exist like that? But that's not how it works in consumer brains. Let me explain how it works in consumer brains. Consumers are extremely busy. They don't have a lot of bandwidth in their brain. So if you try to stick a message in one ear of a consumer, usually what that means is that another message has to fall out. Or if you have a very confusing message that you try to stick in a consumer's ear, chances are it'll bounce off because they'll go, no, 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 that's too complicated. Don't bug me with all this complicated stuff. If you have a brand that is successful and it is a great brand and people love it, chances are you'd say that brand's name and it's going to go in the consumer ear and it's going to stick. Now, you come up with a second brand that is new and you try to stick that in the consumer's ear. How are you going to make sure that it gets in there? If it's brand new, not really tried yet, it'll probably just bounce off. If you connect it to the first brand and say, remember, we're the folks who brought you that thing that you really like. Well, here's another one. It might get in, or it will go boing, because consumers will say, wait a minute, that's confusing. How do those two brands even hang together? And I can tell you, even working with local entrepreneurs here in Victoria, who are not Procter Gamble or Levi's or Ford or General Motors, who are small entrepreneurs, they already are putting out tens, if not dozens, of products on the market. And a lot of the times, my specialty is simplifying things. One of the most asked for products that I have is the process of simplifying all the brands that entrepreneurs are trying to put onto the market. So I do not have a solution for you today, but I have perspective. And what I want to do, I want to go back to a book from 2000, and it was written by two gentlemen named David Aaker and Erich Joachimstaler. And I will write their names down in the show notes so you don't have to remember them. And I will also show the diagram from the book that I'm going to be talking about today as part of the program too. So what this is called, it is called the brand relationship spectrum. And what I'm hoping to do is to shed some light on different ways that you can have your brands hang together or stand apart. And you can decide what makes the most sense for you. Of course, if you need some help, if you want some consultation on this, I'd be happy to have a chat about it and just bounce some ideas around with you. But listen up, buckle in, because this is about to get interesting. All right, now let's start with the simplest one. The simplest one is called a branded house, okay? Now, a branded house, as the name implies, if you walk by a house and it has a big brand on the front of it and a whole bunch of products live inside. Coke, Coca-Cola, could be a great example of a branded house. You have the name Coke out front, and then you've got different types of Coke that live inside. Another one is BMW. You've got the house of BMW. That's what's logoed out front of the house. And then inside, you've got the 3 Series, the 5 Series, the 7 Series, but it's BMW, BMW, BMW. Nokia, another great example of a branded house. You come up and you see Nokia, and then you can choose different model numbers of Nokia. If that sounds simple, It's because it is simple. There is a huge advantage, especially today, in creating what's called a branded house. Why? Because if you haven't noticed, consumers have gotten even more confused. In the 1970s and the 1980s, it was easier to put out different sub-brands from a big brand. However, consumers don't have that kind of bandwidth anymore. We're getting more confused and we're just all going, into catatonic shock because we're being flooded with information all the time. So if you can say, it's Coke, they'll go, thank you. It's BMW, thank you. I don't need to do any more thinking. What's the downside? The downside to a branded house is if you have an Audi car and suddenly the car backs up without being put into reverse and it runs somebody over and you get a huge lawsuit against Audi, not against the sub-brand, against Audi, it's very hard for that master brand to shake off the bad smell. It would be much easier to shake off the bad smell if it was a Saturn by General Motors. But Saturn's the car with a problem, not General Motors. Okay, now that takes us forward into another area, which is if you don't want to create a branded house because of the maybe kind of liability problems that might come. If something goes wrong with one of your product, the entire brand gets tarred and feathered. If you don't want that, you've got the other polar opposite, which is the house of brands. And probably the best way to look at that is to look at Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble makes Tide, Mr. Clean, Febreze, Crest. These brands aren't connected at all. The only connection that they have is that if you flip over a tube of Crest, you'll see Procter & Gamble on it. Okay? That's the only connection. Now, this is very, very smart if you're putting out products all the time and you're wondering, is this new product going to work or is it going to be a dud? If you put out the Procter & Gamble toothpaste and it's a dud, well then Procter & Gamble looks bad. If you put out Crest toothpaste and it's a dud, even though it never was, but it was in theory a dud, well, Crest will die, but Procter & Gamble will remain strong. So that all sounds really good. Why don't we all do a branded house? A house of brands, rather, instead of a branded house. Why don't we just do a house of brands where all the characters living inside this house all have their own brand? It's because things get complicated. Remember when I talked about consumers only having so much space in their noggin? Well, if you try to stick in a Crest, okay, that goes. Mr. Clean, okay, that goes. Febreze, geez, it's getting busy now. I don't know if I can absorb that. Tide, I can't remember all these brands. Now, luckily, Procter & Gamble has more money than God, so they can easily set up individual marketing budgets for each of these brands. But if you're a small brand DIYer, you do not, let me tell you this, you do not have the resources to go out and say, we've got product ABC, we've got brand ABC, we've got brand DEF, we've got brand GHI. You don't have it. Forget about it, okay? So if you get bigger, we all dream of that. I think a house of brands would be a very, very good thing to have for liability issues and in case there's a failure. Now, here's where things get interesting. I want to talk to you about two categories that are in the middle. So you don't have to have exactly a branded house, and you don't have to have exactly a house of brands. So let's take a look at this. There are things called, wait a minute, where's this list from Aaker and where is it now? Darn it all. There is another category called sub-brands. What is a sub-brand? Okay, let's take a look at the world of razors. You have got Gillette, which makes razors. You have also got the Mach 3, which is a very popular razor by Gillette. So if you stick those two together, you have got what's called a sub-brand. Gillette is the master brand. Mach 3 is the sub-brand. However, if I say Mach 3 to you, you will get it. You'll understand what that is. It also works for Sony Trinitron, TV that used to be on the market that everybody knew. Trinitron. Trinitron was a famous TV and everybody knew it was from Sony. You've got things like HP DeskJet. DeskJet is an acknowledged brand. People go, yeah, I know DeskJet. I've got a DeskJet. Well, everybody knows it's also from HP. You've got Dell Dimension, a little fuzzier. You've got Apple Mac. You've got Apple iPad. iPad, that's a brand unto itself. You stick Apple on it. There's two strong brands stuck together. So you've got the potential for creating a brand that is your company name and your product name, and provided that your product name is strong enough to survive and catchy enough to remember and be stuck into consumers' ear, there's every possibility that you can stick the two together. 1 + 1 = 3. Where do things get bad? Well, things get bad when the product that you create is kind of So what it does, you've just connected your big brand to a product, and this product starts to drag your big brand down with it. The Ford Edsel. I rest my case. Edsel was a terrible brand, terrible car, and it died and it dragged Ford down with it. So what else can you do? We can do endorsed brands. So we've got the House of Brands, which is all individual brands inside a house. So Procter Gamble, Tide, Crest, Mr. Clean, Febreze. You've got the branded house, which is one master brand over all of them. Coke, BMW, Nokia. You have got sub-brands. Gillette, strong brand. Mach 3, strong brand. Stick them together, stronger brand. Sony, strong brand. Trinitron, strong brand. Stick them together, you've got a winning story. The final one is endorsed brands, okay? So you have a variation of endorsed brands. You have, on the one hand, you've got a slight endorsement. That is, the master brand just kind of gives you a whiff that they're behind this company or this smaller brand. So, best example, Universal Pictures, good brand. A Sony company. Oh, I didn't know that Sony owned Universal. That's interesting. Sony's a good company too. I don't think of Sony when I think of Universal, but isn't it nice to know that Sony says, yeah, we got your back. You've got our endorsement. So that works really good. It gets even more interesting though, because an endorsement can be incorporating the name. So, Egg McMuffin. You can say Egg Muffin. That's a good muffin. But if you say Egg McMuffin, that gives a subtle endorsement for McDonald's, the restaurant I love. So I love McDonald's, therefore I believe that the Egg McMuffin is a better form of a muffin. And this is an interesting twist, a strong endorsement. Calvin Klein, very famous brand. Calvin Klein's Obsession, also a famous brand. And it's interesting because it almost makes it personal. It's almost like this is what Calvin Klein uses. It's Calvin Klein's obsession. He has a personal stake in the success of Obsession. All right. So to reiterate, we've got 4 different things that we're talking about here. 4 different ways to look at branding your company and branding the products or services that come out of the company. 1, you have got a branded house. That is one brand with a whole bunch of products running around inside of it, okay? The second one, polar opposite, is the House of Brands. Procter Gamble model, which is one house that nobody really knows the name of. And inside that house are a whole bunch of really strong brands. Procter & Gamble, for example, is Mr. Clean, Tide, Febreze, Crest, etc., etc. Each of these stands on their own. The advantages to each and disadvantages are, if you have a house of brands, each brand needs its own marketing budget, needs its own attention. That's a hard thing to do, especially if you're small. The advantage, though, is if you launch a brand and it is awful or it gets itself in trouble, the entire house doesn't collapse. The opposite side, the branded house. So you have got Coke. Much easier to market Coke. One thing, if it's Coke, it's Coke, it's Coke in any language, anywhere in the world. But what happens if Coke has a lawsuit or a scandal? Then all of Coke suffers, all right? The upside and the downside. What most people don't know is that there's variations on these two. There is endorsed brands. It could either be a very slight endorsement. Universal Pictures, strong brand. A Sony company. Oh, I didn't know Sony owned them, but I like Sony too. So it's a slight whiff of endorsement, all the way to a very strong endorsement. Calvin Klein's Obsession. This is the perfume that Calvin Klein uses himself every day, so you better like it. All right? So this is an interesting twist. Now, let's look at Calvin Klein's Obsession. If it turns out to be a stinker, well, it turns out it was just one of Calvin's perfumes. It isn't every Calvin perfume. Calvin will still take a hit if Obsession doesn't work out, but not as strong a hit as if he just called it Calvin Klein. Because then, if it takes a hit, Calvin goes down. And then there are sub-brands, the final category. You have got brands like Gillette, strong brand, Mach 3. You stick both of them together and they create something incredible. You've got Sony and you've got Trinitron. Two strong brands, stick them together, they create something incredible. If Trinitron turns out to be a stinker, Sony does take a hit, because what you're doing is you're kind of putting them up on the same pedestal. However, it is still safer than just calling everything a Sony. It does, however, require its own marketing budget, even though it can bask in the glow of Sony. All right, so house of brands, branded house, sub-brands, endorsed brands, 4 different ways of looking at how you can create a brand for your company and for the products that you put out of that company. So I want to leave you with just a short lesson. Why would you pick one over the other? What you have to do when you're looking at the big picture is look at 2 things. One, how much attention span and money can you put to every individual brand? If the answer is, as I suspect, not a lot, that probably leans you towards a branded house. That is, your company puts out a bunch of products, but each product is not individually strongly branded. It is a product name as opposed to a brand that stands on its own. All right? If you are in the business of launching brands all the time and you have some hits and some misses, it might, however, be worth looking at a house of brands where each brand that you put out there lives or dies on its own without impacting the master brand. Okay? And then the endorsed and the sub-brands, those are just kind of mixes in the middle there. In the truth and reality of it, nothing is usually either black or white, but shades of gray. All right? So I hope this has been helpful. I hope it gives you something to think about when you're developing the brand for your company and developing the brands for your products and services that come out of the company. And that's all I got for you today, a little thought starter for you. I hope that it's been helpful. Have a terrific day. Let's go make some great brands. See you later.